Hello again, and welcome to another chapter of the Leadership Chronicle. We started this webinar series a month ago, and we're now in our fifth episode. We've done chapters 1, 2, 3, an intermission episode with guest speakers last week. And today, I'm happy to be with a special guest speaker, Aris Vrettos, whom you will meet in just after the introduction. So welcome again. You are the reason why we keep motivated to run these webinars every week, because the numbers of viewers is increasing. The number of engagements during the videos and after the videos is also increasing. And the examples you've been sharing with us by email on how you were able to take some of the learning and apply it at your workplace and within your companies actually worked. And that really gives us the motivation and the excitement to continue preparing new topics for you every week and bringing experts in the industry and in the academic field to talk to you about their knowledge and experience. Big need for transformation right now, transforming resources, and we spoke a lot about reframing capabilities over the last two episodes. The speakers we had with us also gave us examples on how business started moving in the right direction when they started reframing their existing capabilities. Big airlines like Virgin Atlantic, American Airlines, and Lufthansa are moving into a cargo model. So they've redesigned the interior of their flight, their airplanes, and they're doing cargo at the moment. Hotels, a lot of hotels around the world have been offering remote offices. So they've redesigned the rooms, the bedrooms, into remote offices for remote workers. Subway found themselves having easy access to grocery and produce, and decided to go into an online grocery delivery model. Mattel, the famous toy company, created a line of toys that is based on action figures inspired by essential workers, such as nurses and supermarket cashiers. A lot of new ideas, a lot of creativity to transform the business and work with the current circumstances. General Motors are using their self-driving cars to deliver food. And there's, we just heard about a big partnership between Facebook and Papa John's, where people can order their pizza while they are on social media. A lot of big partnerships, a lot of transformation. But as we spoke before, what led to this is proper analysis to the risks, the challenges, the threats, and the opportunities the market is offering at the moment. To talk about this, Aris is going to share with us his expertise as the director of the Business Transformation Center for Business Transformation at CISL, University of Cambridge. For you at home watching this, very important reflection after this exercise. Take your notepad and a pen and try to answer 3 questions while we're having a conversation. And if you want to share some of these questions, either pop them in the chat window so we can answer them during the Q&A session at the end, or just put them, so you write them down so you can send them to us by email. The 3 questions that I encourage you to think about and try to answer today are: what was going wrong in my business, and what is going wrong in my business? What wasn't working well while I was very busy doing the day-to-day thing, and now that I have more space, I can identify these and work on them. So that's question 1. Question 2, have you been able to rethink the purpose of your business, the structure and the model of your business? And question 3, what do you need to do to transform your business? So without any more delay, just a quick reminder to pop your questions in the chat window, but also go to webinars.leadership.com, subscribe so we can notify you, or just click subscribe right now on the YouTube channel. If you need to connect with me on LinkedIn, it's Dr. Antoine Eid on LinkedIn, and you can get in touch anytime. That's basically my introduction. Thank you for being patient with the IT internet thing. And I'm going to introduce someone I learned a lot from, Aris Vrettos. Let me move to the camera. Done. Aris, hi.
Hi, Antoine. How are you?
I'm very well. Was the sound very bad over at your end?
It was a little bit artificial and robotic, but
okay.
It's okay now. It works now.
Thank you for being with us today. I know you have a lot to share with the audience. They have a lot to learn from you, and a lot of questions will be asked. Could you please start by introducing yourself, if you don't mind?
Well, thank you, Antoine, and thank you to everyone. It's great. It's a real privilege to be involved in this. So I work on a field called sustainability, which is basically looking at the world and society and economy, and focuses on the role of business. And I'm based here in Cambridge at an organization called the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. And we've been around for about 30 years or so at the Institute, and we're working with governments, finance sector, and in my case, mostly with companies, businesses around the world, to try and challenge some of the old thinking that's kind of holding us down to where we wanted it to get to, and then trying to develop and apply the new types of models, practices, concepts that enable companies to play a much more positive role for themselves and for society more broadly. So that's, if you like, the remit that we're working at the moment, and specifically at the Center for Business Transformation, which I lead. We are, as the title suggests, we are trying to revisit, if you like, what business excellence and success looks like, and we work with many wonderful and kind of forward-looking organizations around the world to try and achieve that.
We are in crisis at the moment. To you, what can you tell our audience about what does this crisis reflect, and what are the future challenges to be expected?
It's the right question, isn't it, these days? So, so first of all, I think this is a crisis. I have not lived through a similar situation, so it's very unprecedented for many of us, but not unexpected. And if from in my world, you know, we've been in a crisis for a while. We've been developing, going into a path that was creating fewer and fewer opportunities for us to not stumble into some big crisis. And talking about our relationship with nature and the environment, climate change and ecosystems, but also in terms of the economy, as well as the impacts and the stresses on society. So, you know, there is a lot of discussion at the moment about how the current health pandemic is related to deforestation, the destruction of natural habitats, bringing nature closer with people, wildlife, illegal trade, and zoonotic diseases, and all those things. So, you know, we'll hear more about that in the next couple of months. But I do recognize that at the moment, the priority is on survival for many organizations to protect their assets, the livelihoods of the people that are involved, and so on. So what I think we should remember is that survival is sometimes more exogenous than we think. We tend to look inside and look at the short-term financial flow and things like that, when and that might work for a short period of time. But the changes that define the resilience of an organization and those trends are very big and have been in traction for a while. So we can't, I think it would be, it's tempting to think about survival today, but not think about survival tomorrow. Because what is clear to us is that we need to build resilience in business, in governments, in societies. And so how do we best prepare ourselves for being able to get out so that we can deal with the current pandemic and the next crisis and the ones that are coming? And some of the ones that are coming are, whether we like it or not, and unfortunately so, are probably at a much, much bigger scale, tragic as the current situation is, than the current one. And I can share with you, Antoine, some of those, why I think those kind of future crises, particularly related to the environment, are kind of significant and important. So, many of you will be familiar with the World Economic Forum's kind of global risks report. Every year they ask about 1,000 CEOs around the world, and they say, what are the biggest risks for your business ahead? And increasingly over the last decade, the issues around climate change, extreme weather events, loss of nature, deforestation have been going up. And I think this year at the start, it's mostly environmental risks. So it's a real business issue. And at the moment, we have millions of people without work or home, and let alone the loss of life. But, we have, to put it in context, you have hundreds of thousands of people, and, we have millions of people, 5 or 6 million people lose their lives every year just because of air pollution, premature deaths. And at the same time, you have things like the US Center for Disease Control highlighting that, a big chunk of the infectious diseases we're about to encounter and we're encountering at the moment come from our interaction with nature. And of course, people will be familiar with the tremendous impact that climate change has had in Australia and South Africa, and the extreme weather events that are associated with it in Europe over the last few years, and so on. So we're moving into a world of crisis, and we have to understand the kind of trajectory we're on. And the last point to make here is, we can't assume that any business or sector or industry can be prosperous in a failing environment and a collapsing society, especially as everyone is so interconnected now. Everything that we do is very, very deeply interconnected with everyone and everything else. So, what happens in our environment, in our society, matters to every sector around the world, I think.
Very interesting, thank you. So to confirm what you're saying, the organizational environment is influenced by the macro environment. It's definitely influenced, impacted by the crisis at the moment. But does it work vice versa? Can the organization influence the environment? Is there any transformation required, given that you said that we've reached a lot of big environmental factors that led to a certain type of crisis, because we used to do things in our own organizations in a certain way? Would that transformation right now have a bigger, more positive impact on the macro environment?
So the short answer is yes. And business has companies of all size and around the world are at the center of this transformation. And there is the reason why we're putting so much pressure in our societies and an environment. And, we shouldn't underestimate the social challenges, particularly, things like the concentration of wealth, the lack of decent jobs, or the high levels of unemployment, things like equality in pay between different types of social structures and kind of genders and so on. All those things add to social stresses and tensions. But if business is at the core, both, if you like, at the moment, some a big chunk of the business community are part of the problem, but equally you can see how organizations can be part of the solution and become really mitigate some of their impacts, but also prepare. Start thinking about what is it that we can do as companies so that we can thrive in this changing world, and as much as possible mitigate it, prevent it from happening at the extreme level. We know there are many physical risks, like the extreme weather events. We know there's a lot of transition risks involved, like how all the environmental regulations, all the commercial implications related to that, customer preferences, and so on. Can business work with their customers, with some of the providers of capital, and ask for kind of different things? And I guess it has to start from within. It's not always easy. It's not easy for all the companies to think about the big picture. For some it's easier than others, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I think one starting point that I find is helpful is think about some of the assumptions, the core assumptions that a business has. Every year we put our business plans together, and we say, yeah, do we ever think, well, the climate will remain stable? Yeah, of course. There will be enough water and enough land to grow our stuff. Yes, of course. Our customers will be, and our clients will be successful. Our clients. We know what the risks are. We'll make a series of assumptions as a business that increasingly do not hold. These are so we have to start to revisit some of those if we are to both plan for a more resilient organization, but also start thinking about the implications of the business and its interaction with the environment, with our consumers, with society, and so on. So
very interesting. That's a totally different, bigger level of thinking on how we can, from our own small corner of the world, be able to influence collectively the bigger picture and lead the world to a better place. So if I may go back to the start of this conversation, we have two worries in mind at the moment as businesses. We want to survive, we want to make ends meet, but at the same time, we need to make the necessary changes for our own business to grow, provide for the new challenges, but at the same time, possibly use this opportunity as people or businesses to create a new purpose that could be beneficial for society and for sustainability. Do you think that society is going to accept these changes easily? And my other question is, do you know of any examples of these transformations?
Thank you, Antoine. I mean, that's again the right question and a difficult one. So of course you have to focus on survival, but it's a matter of also thinking about how often do you get into survival mode? Because we had the previous, what was it, 10, 12 years ago, we had the big financial crisis. And then, we all, people said, oh, it's an opportunity to reshape the financial system and, make it work for many, avoid falling back into the trap of too much power in the hands of few financial institutions, too big to fail, and so on. And here we are, 10, 12 years later, not having really addressed the challenges that exist. So it's the appetite to try and get back into it is very, very strong. I guess there are, in terms of, I would say there's quite a few examples of, and just to get back to one of the points you made, Antoine, I think it's not just about a single business, wherever it might be, sorry, trying to do what's best for society globally. It's about, your local environment, your local community, the people around you, creating trust, creating goodwill, not compromising the local environment or competing with people for scarce resources and so on. So it at the moment, it's very local. And some of the new movements that exist are very, very local in nature. But let me describe some of the implications. So about 6 or 7 years ago, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, basically said, we have all the energy, electricity, utility companies have to start planning for a future outside coal, because coal is such a dirty fossil fuel that contributes disproportionately heavily to climate change through the emission of greenhouse gases. And some utilities in Europe just, look at their balance sheets and their customers and said, you know what, we're fine. Our customers are successful, we're successful. Why change? It's attractive to not change, to not get into. And of course, some of those big utilities in Europe, like RWE and E.ON, had to write off billions and billions of euros and stranded assets and split their businesses, one with coal and dirty and nuclear or other, and then relaunch as renewables. Whereas, if you like, companies like, just to stay in the same sector, the Danish utility, Dong, kind of moved more willingly, if you like, and smoothly from a oil and gas organization to a renewables utility. And if you type online and try and find a graph of its share price after the move, you'll see how it has rocketed. And that demonstrates, goes to the point of your second question, that society no longer asks what we were providing them in the past. So the challenge, which is, okay, I'll try to be more sustainable, more environmentally friendly and all that, but will my customers like it? Yes, of course. They're asking for it. We saw it with the plastics conversation. We see it with people asking for renewable energy versus coal-generated energy. We see it with the demand for cars and electric vehicles and other forms of mobility. Every single sector at the moment we see. So it's the trend is definitely there. And the consumer base and society is definitely asking for those types of questions and products and services.
It's very interesting to see it from that perspective. Obviously, you've been trying to address a crisis that has been there for a long time before the Corona crisis. So you've become experts, and you've become used to dealing with crises that small businesses sometimes are not really very much aware of it, because they have less impact on the environment than those bigger players in the market, which you have been dealing with for quite a while. And now we add this new layer, this new dimension of crisis right now, which maybe you can confirm that somehow has helped to positively deal with the first one, with the sustainability, with the environment issue, even if temporarily, by decreasing mobility and decreasing energy consumption at the moment while people are on lockdown. But it helps businesses of any size to really think of their contribution. How are we contributing to a better world, and how are we preventing another unforeseen crisis to happen in the future? And I would like to address this topic next week with a creativity session where people participate just by providing their own insight on what they think might happen in the future. What are the potential threats out there? No matter how crazy the ideas might sound, nobody expected Corona to happen like this and this fast. Something else might happen. So, are we ready to deal with these? Are we even contributing for these to happen even faster? Big questions to ask. At the same time, in parallel, if we want to address the other challenges of how can I keep my business surviving right now? How can I pay my employees and how can I make ends meet as a business owner? That's another, that's another dimension of challenge that people are thinking about right now. So if we revisit the first three questions that we asked in the beginning, what was going wrong? And Aris is encouraging everybody to think not only in terms of what was going wrong in my business structure, in my business model, the way I used to sell things and market things, but also what was going wrong in how am I leaving a certain impact on society, on the environment, and on the world in general. Two different angles to answer this question. So take your time, I answer these on your own papers. What was going wrong in my business, and what are the risks and challenges? The opportunities, Aris, obviously, as you mentioned, some big organizations managed to do some major transformation over the year, and they still are in the process of making transformation. Um, is this possible? Can we give us some positive hope that if we put the effort in the right place, that transformation is possible?
Well, it's necessary, I should say, Antoine. You know, whether we like it or not, there's big change happening. And the examples that I gave are basically point to a willing transformation, i.e., some kind of a planned change, or a disruptive one. You know, think about all the companies that, you know, and to your point about the SMEs, you know, SMEs are the blood and engine of the global economy. The majority of the companies are SMEs, and they employ the majority of people, but also, you know, they operate in global supply chains and provide and supply the big organizations. So, you know, impacts environmental, social, economic, and we speak the language of economics really to make those cases. You know, they impact people in a similar way. It's not just relevant for bigger companies. And in Cambridge at CISL, we have an accelerator, and it's, you know, it's aimed specifically at building resilience in SMEs, and we do two things, both to build, you know, resilience in terms of running the business, but also how can you contribute as a startup or as a small business to the solutions that we need, the technologies, for example, the new business models on food, on agriculture, on energy, on health. You know, those are the types of ideas that are getting traction and funding, which is important. And I guess one way that companies, is a safe way to think about transformation is, what have I been doing so far that will no longer be acceptable by society in the next few years? That is, you know, we saw it with, you know, companies, we saw it with plastics. This can be, you know, pollution. This can be unequal pay. There's, you know, having, you know, it's easy. There are many ways to get to that checklist and really think about what is it that I've been doing, even if it's profitable or was profitable, that, you know what, it's probably not going to make it over the next 5 or so years. You can bet that that has a really high chance of being disrupted. Somebody out there is working in coming up with a business that substitutes that, or we'll have those big crises and disruptions, whereas government will say, I'm really sorry, we can no longer do that if we are to stay within the environmental limits. And I guess there is a positive, you can look at it from a positive or a negative way, whatever you want to call it. The bottom line is that change is inevitable. And I would say that small companies are more agile and easier to repurpose, easier to think and act very quickly and respond to some of those changes and create those platforms. Maybe they come together with peers and other similar organizations. But, thinking ahead and looking behind, it's not about the future, but combination of looking behind at what hasn't been working, the kind of changes that are necessary, and what kind of things will be successful and thriving as the world is moving towards that particular direction.
This is really great, but are you facing any resistance when it comes to businesses at the moment being more occupied with thinking short term right now, thinking of surviving and not being able to look at this strategic perspective of things?
Of course, that is, I wouldn't call it resistance. I would say necessity, and the conversations I'm having and the work that we're doing is about building the whole picture of a business. How is a business resilient, commercially successful, as well as inclusive, circular, and thriving and restorative, thriving along the same parameters. I don't think anyone is asking anyone to kind of radically transform the organization today and be ready for next week. I think that would be very, very foolish. I think some companies and some sectors have to. They have been caught out by this crisis. And, in the pursuit of extreme efficiency, we've left very little margin for resilience. So all the a lot of the just-in-time interconnected sort of systems have come under immense pressure. You mentioned airlines. It's a sector that will now rely on government funding to continue to survive. And some governments are now asking, well, yes, we might provide you with that funding, but you need to provide us with reassurances that you will be a much better company when it comes to climate change and the environment. The European Union, the EU Green Deal, a lot of the countries are now asking the economic recovery, the trillions of euros and dollars that's going to be spent on the recovery package to be a green one. So it's not like it's not like companies don't know that this is a necessity. It's part and parcel. You can't take your eye off today and surviving economically and financially, making sure you protect your people, but also creating the right environment for the people without, at the same time, thinking about what it is that is going to keep you afloat in 3, 6 months, 1 year, 2, 3 years, and so. So it's the same narrative. And of course, priorities will differ over time, but the overall plan for business is an integrated economic, social, and environmental attitude and approach that kind of is based on change, looking ahead, rather than, if you like, complacency, thinking about the legacy of the past.
Thank you. This is really interesting. I'm really happy we're talking about this because we actually haven't covered any of that strategic thinking over the last 4 chapters, the last 3 chapters and the intermission episode. We spoke more about how to manage that day-to-day right now, how to deal with existing challenges of leading other people, of building leadership skills in our teams, and so on. But this is a nice angle to look at this, and it puts us under the responsibility to start thinking of a new purpose for our organization, other than for business purpose. What advice do you have for organizations when it comes to creating a new purpose?
So I think that the work that we do on on purpose here is centered on a couple of things. The first one is that if you get it right, if you get your business purpose, your views, what you're here to do as an organization, if you get it right and you put it in action, in the decisions you make, the things you buy, how you sell, what kind of practices, it has a very, very powerful potential. It can mobilize people, it can incentivize people. It tells your funders what you stand for. It tells your clients what you stand for and what they can expect from you. It allows companies to take difficult decisions under uncertainty because they have a purpose and they have a long-term focal point rather than having to zigzag all the time. And that can be really, really helpful. I think that the kind of the one of the helpful things about getting to that purpose is to consider what is it that the company can provide, what is that unique value, what is that, how the organization, big or small, how does it play a part in providing responses, in solving problems, in making people's lives better and more, building trust, building resilience, and creating a better enabling environment for everybody else. And it's not always visible, but if a conscious and kind of deep, and it doesn't have to be a big program of revisiting, but a good conversation with some of the people that the business works with and its own employees to see, are we reflecting the values of the people? Are people motivated to kind of work here and go above and beyond what a normal organization? Those are the types of purposes that deliver more, if you like, for the companies that apply them and employ them. The other thing that I would say for the work that we do is sustainability is a powerful language. People connect to nature. People connect to biodiversity. People connect to the challenges that we face, the future that their kids are going to come against. And if we can build that better world narrative into the role and the DNA of the organization, that can be a very strong thing. And maybe decisions about what the company makes, what kind of products, what kind of services it provides, and to whom it can be informed with that. It makes the alignment with consumer preferences and interests tighter, as opposed to always trying to sell and fight back against that changing tide. So there's a lot of discussion about purpose at the moment, but there's also quite a bit of greenwashing. Follow your purpose and follow your values and follow your dreams and so on. But at the bottom line is that it's a simple process of understanding where the world is headed and what kind of role the organization needs to play to be a contributor in that. Because as I said, governments and consumers and funders are going to be asking very difficult questions, and we all have to justify our existence. And it's the same for academic institutions and universities and so on. We all have to get a much better narrative of how we belong in this new and changing world.
Thank you. It's making me also reflect about my business and the business of clients I work with. It seems everybody has a role right now. We have a role from our leadership position. Governments play a role. Public has a role, and we all are involved in creating a better future and dealing with these risks and with the challenges that are coming. Where do you think that we would be facing obstacles when it comes to government, public, and SMEs?
I think there's obstacles wherever you look, with inside companies, outside governments and markets, everywhere. And it's a matter of seeing them as barriers to be overcome, or as very, very overwhelming challenges. People are resistant to change. We know that. We don't like change. We know societies are resistant to change. We don't like change. We know that we measure, the simplest example of how the incentives are wrong is the GDP, the gross domestic product, for example. And how we measure the performance of companies. So at the company level, we focus on short-term financial performance. We talk about the quantity of a business's of a volume and the quantity of growth, but not the quality of growth. We never talk about the quality of a business. We're just asking companies, as long as you sell X units, we'll be behind you. That's clearly wrong, and it's really bad advice and a very bad compass that has led many companies astray into the example, like the example I gave earlier. At the bigger level, governments still make decisions about which way the economy is heading, be in terms of quantity of economic output. Very little about the quality of that output. Very little about things like happiness and quality of life and trust in societies. And it's a matter of having a surviving and efficient health system versus a little bit more expensive health system that can withstand those types of crises. You see it in bids in procurement, public procurement, where the first or priority is always cost and time. We see examples now where all of these things are changing. There's new regulations, new metrics. Some public procurement bids are now asking for quality, compliance with environmental regulations, considerations about alignment with and resilience against climate change risks. But none of those things happen until and unless companies of all sizes come together and say, what, that's kind of wrong. We want to work in a different way, and kind of create that type of movement and momentum. So it's everyone has difficult measures and metrics, but the some of the solutions come by working together, and others come by being radical and just cutting through of it and coming up with those types of new ideas and concepts that just bypass the system. And SMEs are probably the best examples of those types of new business models and ideas that have done that.
Yes, and we're seeing around us a lot of changes. We had 9 speakers last time, and they also shared their experience on how they transformed some of their products, their distribution channels, etc., in order to make that transformation. But while you're speaking, Aris, there's Andy, Luay, and some of our viewers are actually posting some interesting comments. And these actually also represent a lot of the thinking right now when we hear about long-term strategy. Questions like, people are more occupied with going back to normal, but nobody knows what the next normal is. Products are going to change. The client is going to change. We are changing as an organization. But what about also the greed that we see right now with pharmaceutical companies, with these companies that are trying to take advantage of this crisis situation to go back to their old greedy ways of pushing these mass products to the market? How do you address this kind of challenges?
So I can't comment on kind of the sector and the pharma companies as such. I'm sure everyone has difficult. It's a challenging time for many people, but what I know is that all kinds of sectors, many sectors have companies that are trying to, if you like, exploit the system to internalize the profits and externalize the costs. Yeah, the oil and gas industry, the automotive sector, food, every single sector has been trying, technology and everyone else. Society creates a lot of social goods and public goods, trust, talent, communication, ability, and the environment provides us, or the ecosystems provide us with a stable environment. And then we take all that and we put it into a cooperation system, a capitalist model, which can be sometimes benevolent, sometimes very, very aggressive. And then we distribute that wealth with sometimes very little accountability. And that's the thing, no one can change on their own, if you like. That's why we're calling the work that we do is about, okay, how do business want to be measured? What does success look like for an organization? That's why we're talking about the quality of growth. Some of those practices that are unsustainable, you have to question, you see organizations repurposing what they do at the moment, and you see some interesting collaboration. So you see, for example, staff from McDonald's in Germany that were closed, the restaurants, they went to work at Lidl or Aldi. They reached an agreement between the two companies because the supermarket, which was a pillar of community at the time, needed more workers to respond to demand. So, you have those creative examples of collaboration.
Schools around the UK, also the school teachers are actually not teaching, but they're taking care of the children of key workers, like nurses and doctors, and that's also another.
Yes, I think, Antoine, you're right. I think the only way to avoid or to, as much as possible, practices that are unfair, unjust, and unsustainable is to demand and ask and lead by example on the types of practices that you think are fair and sustainable. It's it's very difficult to achieve something. So when companies behave in a less responsible way, whatever sector they come on, increasingly governments are trying to put some action, and funders as well. But there's a lot of lobbying, there's a lot of interest, and by sending signals to the decision makers that some of these practices are no longer acceptable, we strengthen the hand of those that can actually do something about some of those changes. And some people might, there's short-term profitability but long-term viability of a business, and that's the example of a lot of the coal industry in the US over the last decade, who were trying to cash in and trying to avoid, and there are some good companies there and loads of very good people that lost their jobs, but as an entity, people were trying to cash in at the last as much as possible, but in the end, society took it all back.
That's nice. It's really interesting also to see the debate right now between two different, very important ways of looking at this crisis right now. You, from a broader strategic perspective, from a sustainability perspective, and myself being a small business owner, and most of the people we have in the audience right now, leaders of their own organizations, thinking, I want to make the best out of this situation. I want to survive, but I also want to recreate the business. I want to have a purpose. They've got good intentions. We all had the space to do some positive thinking about our lives and about our organizations. A lot of companies managed to be very creative and innovative at keeping their employees somehow, and that's also really amazing. But it shows also that in a state of anxiety, it is important to talk to someone like yourself to push us to think of the bigger questions. Einstein says we cannot resolve all problems, or new problems with an old way of thinking that was there when we created the problems. So we must start thinking differently. We must start creating new purpose, start transforming in the direction of that purpose. A lot. I've been working on something this week that's quite fun. I'm thinking about the difference between. I'm trying to imagine the personality, for instance, of an employee before Corona. An employee who would wake up in the morning, commute to work, stays in the office for 8 hours, has a director at work, uses office computer, etc. And what we can start seeing, a transformation to an employee after Corona, a more independent person who's working from home. The whole recruitment process is going to change right now. The whole job description is going to change. We're going to be talking a lot about certain personality traits where people are more result-driven and more independent thinkers. A lot is changing in the way we think and we lead. But it took some fear, some denial, some acceptance, some learning for us to start thinking about these changes, about these transformations. And if you're listening and you still consider yourself to be in denial or in fear or in anxiety, that's just a part of a normal process. We've all been through that process where we did not have the answers. We had uncertainty about the future. But that is going to lead to some learning. And with learning comes innovation, creativity, and change. I've read a couple of comments from Andy, from Carla. A lot of lessons are learned. Change is needed. Innovation and creativity, resilience. We heard this word a lot since the beginning of the crisis. Really interesting engagement at the same time. Thank you, Aris, for making us think about these. If you don't mind, if you can stay with us, I just want to regress a little bit and go back to the original questions of the importance of putting down a list. I'm sure most of you have done this already, but if you haven't, try to visualize what was going wrong in the organization. What could I have done better? What are the opportunities out there? They could be internal and they could be external. What can I do today that can influence not only my business and the welfare of my business, myself as an owner, as a team leader, but also my close community and eventually the bigger environment? These are the questions that we need to address at the moment, because these questions will ensure the sustainability not only of our business, but life. And if life sustains, our business sustains, and we sustain. And this is how it goes. A lot of people, a lot of heroes behind the curtain, such as you, Aris, and your team, working on these big themes of saving the planet and teaching people the importance of having a sustainable way of life. So thank you very much for being with us today. I tried to cover as much as possible from the questions and the comments received. Most of it, interestingly, was a game of tug of war with you, thinking about, okay, this is great, but I also need to think about today and tomorrow. And both opinions are very valid. This leads to that, and that also protects this. Anything else? Carla just joined and said, this crisis taught us a lot of lessons to adapt to sudden changes. We will be talking about this, Carla, in the next chapter. How do we simulate scenarios in the organization to raise the organizational immunity? And I will need you as our viewers to join and give us your input on what do you think is some creative ideas to do that. I think this covers most of it. I hope I haven't left any comment there, but I tried to address most of the points just briefly. Just to summarize, 3 questions. my advice is try to answer them just before you leave the desk where you're listening to us today. Write on your paper the answers to these three questions. Try to come up with a list, a short list of things you need to do. Make decisions that involve purpose, that involve transformation and transition. And if you like to share them, please either comment on the video or just send them by the email. As you know, we send a follow-up email the next morning. Send this by email so we can share with everyone else. I have before we finish, I have a little surprise for you. Just let me share my screen quickly. Aris, thank you so much for joining us today. Always a pleasure talking to you, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you. I hope the screen doesn't hope it works. So if you can see my screen and you can hear me well, we've been talking a lot about the importance of self-leadership and self-awareness over the last few chapters, and the importance of starting by being aware of our own feelings during this period of time, so we can control them and be in a position to help others and understand other people's feelings. So we tried through some research to put this in a fun activity for you. We will share this on LinkedIn tomorrow morning, and all you need to do is just reflect back on where was I, what was my state of mind just before the crisis in January. Was I leading successfully, or was I in a position to help others, or was I already somewhere along fear, denial, acceptance, learning, and leading? And just click on that feeling you had. And then in February, when the crisis started and the lockdown in different countries, what state of mind, what feelings did I start having? And just click there. And once you finish, you see the fluctuation of your feelings through the crisis, and it will show you a certain line, your chronometer line. And we will be sending you an analysis of that line. What does it mean to be moving through these stages, these emotional stages, and what advice we can give you to continue from here for the coming weeks and months until this is over. It's a self-reflection, self-awareness exercise that is going to help a lot of people really think about, how am I thinking about this? How is my thinking progressing and my feelings progressing through this crisis? And whether there's a wake-up call that needs to take place to help us look at things differently. The link would be webinars.leadership.com. If you are online right now, you should receive that link in your chat window, webinars.leadership.com/chronometer. Click, enjoy the game. We'll receive your inquiry and send you the analysis. Share it with your friends. I've seen a lot of these circulate around social media, people really wanting to understand their own emotions at this stage. So we hope we'll bring you something innovative here. Otherwise, basically that's it. Let me quickly go back to check your questions. And if there's nothing, we hope to see you next week. Any new questions here? No questions. So thank you very much for being with us today. Next week, next Wednesday, at the same time, 4 p.m. UK time, we will be talking about how to build your organizational immunity. Please share your reflection with others so they can learn from your experience and your reflection. this is the objective behind this webinar series, is to help you reflect on things, learn through your reflection, which is facilitating information to you. And we hope to see you again next week. Bye-bye.